Clara Moss moved quietly through the grand estate, her footsteps soft against the polished marble floor. The night air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and fresh flowers, and the murmur of laughter drifted from the ballroom where the evening party was in full swing. In her plain uniform, she was nearly invisible among the sparkling gowns and tailored tuxedos of the guests. Yet beneath her calm exterior, a small flame of longing burned quietly, a wish to be seen, not just as a maid but for something more. Clara's hands found the grand piano in the corner of the room, running gently over its glossy surface as if seeking comfort. Music had always been her refuge, a secret world where she could lose herself from the weight of everyday chores and whispered judgments. Tonight, though, that refuge was about to be thrust into the unforgiving spotlight. Madame Langford, the estate's dazzling and imperious owner, was surveying her guests with the sharp gaze of a seasoned socialite. Known for her confident charm but ruthless manner, Madame Langford delighted in controlling everything within her realm. When her eyes fell on Clara, the gleam changed to something colder, almost amused. Clara felt a jolt of panic but tried to keep her composure. "Clara," Madame Langford called sharply, her voice cutting through the music and chatter. "Come here." Clara hesitated, glancing at the curious glances of the guests who had noticed the exchange. Approaching with measured steps, she swallowed her apprehension. Madame Langford's smile was thin and mocking. "Let's have a bit of fun," she said. "Sing for us." Surely someone who spends so much time near the piano can entertain the company. A hush settled over the room as all eyes turned toward Clara. She was to perform, not of her own choosing, but for the amusement of others. The first note was hers to find. Clara stood in the center of the grand ballroom, the polished floor reflecting the crystal chandeliers above. The air felt heavy, as if time itself had slowed, and all the laughter and music chatter dulled to the background, swallowed by the myriad of eyes now locked on her. The guests, wrapped in their elegant gowns and sharp suits, shifted uneasily in their seats and clusters. Some whispered behind delicate fans or raised their glasses to hide smirks. Clara's throat tightened as she struggled to breathe beneath the weight of their gazes. Madame Langford stood nearby, arms folded, her expression a mask of cruel amusement. "Sing," she commanded softly, the word laced with the clear expectation that Clara's performance was not a gift but a courtesy extracted for the room's entertainment. Clara's fingers trembled as they brushed lightly against the keys of the grand piano. The polished surface was cool beneath her skin, but the warmth of embarrassment rose fiercely in her cheeks. She took a shaky breath and began to sing, a modest, tentative melody, her voice trembling at first. It held a fragile hope for kindness, but the room's reaction was not what she had imagined. Laughter cut through her song, sharp and unkind. Madame Langford's smirk deepened as some guests openly exchanged amused glances, their eyes sparkling with disdain. One of the younger men exclaimed loudly, "Well, that's entertainment, isn't it?" and the group around him chuckled. A couple of the women whispered sharply, and Clara could catch hurtful words, awkward, out of place, though the din of the party masked the full scope of their ridicule. Clara's voice faltered, each note feeling more exposed than the last. The song she had once cherished became an instrument not of joy but of humiliation. She wished to shrink into the floor, to vanish entirely, yet every guest's eye stayed fixed on her. She kept singing, afraid to stop, knowing that silence might invite worse condemnation. Madame Langford approached slowly, her voice icy. "That's enough." She waved a dismissive hand, as if brushing away an inconvenient insect. "You're no singer, Clara. Just a servant, after all." Some guests clapped, but it was a slow, forced applause. The weight of embarrassment crushed Clara. Tears burned behind her eyelids, but she blinked them away fiercely. She could not afford to break down here, no one would offer comfort in this gilded cage. The room buzzed with murmurs, some curious, others gleefully judgmental. A clergyman sitting near the edge shook his head disapprovingly, while a respected aristocratic matron whispered to her companion, How bold of Madame Langford to expose such mediocrity under our noses. Clara stepped away from the piano, her legs weak beneath her. She sought an exit, a moment's peace, perhaps the modest servants' quarters where she could catch her breath and avoid the eyes that burned into her back. Yet Madame Langford was not done with her. "No, no, Clara," she called sharply, raising her voice so the room flinched. "Why stop now? We need to hear more of this talent. A girl who can't handle a single song should be made to try again. Let everyone enjoy the show." A few guests nodded with ill-disguised relish, as though eager to prolong the spectacle. The oppressive air thickened, making Clara's skin prickle with discomfort. Her hope for quick release dashed. She was trapped, locked in a spotlight she never sought. Beads of sweat formed at her temples. She hesitated, then forced a nod, unwilling to challenge Madame Langford further. The whispers that followed her every step carried venom disguised as curiosity. Some tried to console in half-hearted tones, but most just watched, amused by the unfolding drama. "What would possess her to sing at such a gathering?" a woman muttered, her tone tight with disdain. "She's a servant, must be some madness to draw attention like this," replied another guest, a hint of pity or mockery skimming their voice. Clara's mind reeled. She had come to accept the modest life of a maid, to work quietly and keep her talents hidden, but now the entire room witnessed her vulnerability laid bare. The humiliation was raw, slicing deeper than dusting forgotten antiques or serving cold champagnes. Yet Madame Langford was relentless. With a sly smile, she gestured toward the microphone stand hastily brought from the corner. "Come now, Clara, don't be shy. Give us a real performance." The clinking of glasses stopped as Clara took tentative steps forward, her fingers grazing the microphone. The polished metal felt heavy and foreign in her grasp. Her whole body trembled with a mixture of fear and rising defiance. The guests settled into expectant silence, all eyes sharp and curious, waiting to see the maid embarrass herself further, or perhaps to reveal some hidden truth. Clara's heart hammered painfully in her chest. In the tense stillness, some faces softened with sympathy, others hardened with judgment. A young woman near the front whispered across to her companion, "Poor thing, she's so out of place here." An elderly man emerged from his silent reserve and muttered, "Why degrade her? There is no need for such cruelty." Clara's vision blurred as tears fought for release once more. She swallowed hard, refusing to give her tormentors that victory. Every ounce of herself screamed to run, to decline, to take refuge in anonymity, but the crushing weight of expectation pinned her in place. She wanted to tell Madame Langford to stop, to leave her be. But the anticipation pulsed through the crowd like a tangible breath, demanding she sing again. The music was a noose around her neck. As Clara raised her head and opened her mouth, her voice failed her for a beat, a faltering moment marked by silence that rippled through the crowd. The gasps and whispers grew louder, and some turned away, unable to watch. Here, in this vast room filled with opulence and scorn, Clara felt impossibly small. She was the servant forced to become the spectacle, the joke pinned under the bright gleam of polished chandeliers and the cold weight of high society's disdain. What could she do now? Could she escape the suffocating eyes and relentless demands? Or was this night to be a long, unforgiving memory etched into her soul forever? The guests waited, their breaths held, for Clara to answer with her voice, one small note that might either save her or shatter what was left of her whispered dreams. Clara's throat felt dry, her heart pounding in a rhythm that nearly drowned out the silence that had settled over the grand ballroom. The room was seized in a fragile stillness, the kind that follows a failed note, a break in the expected, a hesitation that draws all senses taut. She glanced at Madame Langford, whose smug expression had shifted into something more like skepticism, her eyes narrowing in both surprise and anticipation of failure. Every pair of eyes was fixed on Clara, weighing her next move like a judge measuring the fate of a defendant. The polished crystal chandeliers cast a cold light that shimmered off the faces of the guests, some eager for amusement, others bored by the spectacle, a few with dawning curiosity. It was a moment thick with expectation, and Clara felt it like a physical force pressing against her chest. She closed her eyes briefly, relying on something deep inside, a well of strength she hadn't dared tap into until now. The world beyond her secret music lessons and stolen moments by the piano faded away. This was her chance, whether she liked it or not, to reclaim her voice, her identity. Taking a shuddering breath, Clara opened her mouth and sang. But it was not the timid, faltering melody from before. This time, her voice poured forth with a surprising clarity and power that immediately silenced the room. Rich and resonant, her notes carried a soulful depth that seemed to wrap around the space, captivating both friends and critics alike. The vulnerability she had worn like a shield transformed into breathtaking artistry. The guests stared, their expressions shifting from derision to disbelief. Madame Langford's smile faltered, her eyes widening as if caught off guard by an unexpected storm. For several moments, even the musicians who had fallen silent earlier seemed suspended in awe. Clara's confidence grew with each phrase, no longer singing for mercy or pleading for acceptance, but delivering a performance that radiated from a core of unshakable passion. Her hands found the piano keys with assured grace, accompanying her voice in a flowing harmony that hinted at the years she had spent nurturing her hidden talent away from prying eyes. Murmurs spread through the crowd like wildfire. A few guests leaned forward, captivated by the raw emotion and the polished skill. The previously mocking whispers of servant and mediocre vanished in the wake of her voice. "You didn't tell us Clara could sing like this," a woman whispered in awe, eyes wide and sparkling. Nearby, a gentleman leaned toward the ear of his companion and chuckled. Madame Langford might have underestimated her, quite thoroughly. The applause that followed was hesitant at first, but it quickly swelled into a wave of genuine appreciation. Guests who moments earlier had scoffed were now standing, some even cheering and whistling softly. Cameras hidden among the attendees whirred quietly, capturing the astonishing transformation. Madame Langford stood frozen, her usual poise replaced by a restless discomfort. The hostess who had so confidently dominated the evening's proceedings found herself undone by a maid-turned-musical prodigy, exposed in front of the very crowd she prided herself on controlling. "Enough," Madame Langford finally called out, her voice wavering. "That's quite enough singing, Clara." But the words sounded hollow, lacking the power they once held. Clara took a slow breath, the last note lingering in the air like an echo that refused to fade. Her eyes scanned the room, meeting astonished and approving glances, finding unexpected allies in the most unlikely of places. Among the guests was a tall, distinguished man with silver-streaked hair and a discerning gaze, Mr. Tobias Reed, a renowned music producer whose keen ear had launched many careers. He smiled, his eyes gleaming with interest rather than condescension. Once the music ended, a respectful hush fell over the room before the murmurs rose again, this time filled with excitement and admiration. The transformation was palpable. Clara had overturned the assumptions held against her and claimed her moment without hesitation. A young woman who had earlier whispered cruel comments now reached for a glass to cover her mouth in stunned silence. Nearby, a pair of older men exchanged nods, acknowledging the undeniable talent before them. Even some guests who had sided with Madame Langford looked uncomfortable, their expressions softened by the unexpected revelation. "Who knew?" a middle-aged gentleman murmured, his voice tinged with respect. "She's a diamond hidden in plain sight." Clara lowered her hands from the piano and straightened slowly, her pulse racing but steady. The room's energy had shifted, from mockery to admiration, from scorn to celebration. Madame Langford, however, retreated a step, her polished mask fracturing. For the first time that evening, her control slipped, leaving a flicker of vulnerability beneath the hard exterior. The atmosphere was electric with anticipation, questions, whispered speculations, and the undeniable promise of newfound opportunity danced in the air. Clara's lips curled into a small, victorious smile. She had faced the overwhelming glare of judgment and emerged not defeated but shining. The music had revealed not only her voice but her strength. And in that moment, as the crowd buzzed with awe and disbelief, Clara Moss stood transformed, from mere servant to the rightful owner of the stage. The hum of conversation pulsed through the grand ballroom, now softened by the lingering traces of Clara's music. The guests, still caught in the afterglow of her unexpected performance, began to murmur, casting curious glances at the once overlooked maid who had so effortlessly captured their attention. Whispers drifted in fragments. She must have had training. I wonder where she learned to sing like that, such poise, hidden beneath that modest dress. Among them, the story of Clara began to weave itself, an emerging tapestry of resilience and hidden grace that none had predicted. Clara herself remained composed, though a flutter of nerves tingled beneath her calm exterior. The stark reality was settling in. This was no longer a fleeting moment. Questions would be asked, stories would be told, and the world as she knew it was changing. It was then that Theodore Green, Madame Langford's longtime confidant, approached quietly. Clad in a tailored suit that bore the subtle insignia of an influential publisher, Theodore had watched the evening unfold with a mix of intrigue and skepticism. "Miss Moss," he began, his voice low and respectful, "may I have a word?" Clara nodded, grateful for the reprieve from the spotlight. They moved to a quieter corner, where Theodore's curiosity broke into genuine admiration. "You sang with such depth and mastery," he said. "May I ask, what's your story?" A faint smile curved Clara's lips as she glanced away momentarily. "I studied music once, years ago," she confessed. "But life took a different path." Her eyes flicked back to Theodore, steady and honest. "I needed to support my family. The chances to pursue music slipped away." The admission hung between them, a quiet testament to dreams deferred, sacrifices made beneath the weight of responsibility. Theodore's expression softened. "You have a gift that deserves more than hidden corners and dusty piano benches. Have you considered returning to music professionally?" Clara hesitated, the idea swirling tantalizingly just beyond reach. "I've always kept it private," she said. "Afraid to be judged." Theodore shook his head gently. "Judgment is inevitable, Miss Moss, but talent like yours commands respect. Sometimes, all it takes is one moment, one chance." As they spoke, snippets of conversation floated nearby. Madame Langford, now silenced with an uncharacteristic unease, conversed stiffly with a few remaining guests. Her confident poise had dimmed, replaced by a flicker of discomfort as the evening's events rewrote the narrative she had once firmly controlled. Meanwhile, the music producer from the earlier performance, Tobias Reed, approached Clara, his presence commanding yet kind. "Miss Moss," he said warmly, extending a hand, "I was fortunate to hear your voice tonight. Have you ever imagined sharing it on a larger stage?" Clara blinked, taken aback by the directness but also the sincere invitation embedded in his tone. "I've dreamed of it," she admitted softly, "but life had other plans." Tobias smiled. "Perhaps it's time to reconsider. I'd like to offer you an opportunity to record your music professionally. This industry needs voices like yours, unmistakably genuine and full of soul." The room seemed to shift with the weight of the offer, the reality of a new path spreading like sunlight through a previously closed window. Clara looked around, seeing the faces of the guests, many transformed from skeptics to admirers, eyes bright with newfound respect. Her simple attire could no longer conceal the woman within, one woven from quiet dignity, latent talent, and an unyielding spirit cultivated through hardship. In that moment, the layers of Clara's identity began to peel back. She was not merely the maid who dusted the grand piano or served tea. She was a woman who had sacrificed dreams to sustain those she loved, whose heart had never lost its passion for music despite years of silence. Those who had dismissed her as inconsequential now saw her as a symbol of perseverance and grace. The whispers around her became questions of curiosity rather than scorn. A wealthy philanthropist expressed interest in sponsoring lessons. A journalist sought an interview for an upcoming society magazine. Friends of Theodore offered invitations to salons and gatherings where Clara's talent could flourish. Even Madame Langford found herself immersed in a reflective silence, perhaps recognizing, albeit reluctantly, that the girl she had tried to belittle had ignited a spark that would not be extinguished. That evening marked not just a turning point for Clara but also a quiet shift in the delicate balance of social hierarchies, reminding all in attendance that talent and worth often lie buried beneath expectations and appearances. After the guests began to depart, Clara lingered by the grand piano, her fingers trailing gently across the keys as she contemplated what the future might hold. Life had presented her with an unexpected crossroads, one illuminated by the faith of strangers and her own rediscovered courage. Whether she would accept the path laid before her, with all its uncertainties and promises, was a question that stirred within her, a blend of hope, apprehension, and resolve. As the silvery moonlight filtered through the tall windows, casting long shadows across the room, Clara Moss felt a quiet determination settle over her. She was ready to embrace the journey ahead, no longer hiding but stepping fully into the light. The story of the maid who sang for an audience and left with a record deal was only beginning. The weeks that followed the unforgettable evening at Madame Langford's estate unfolded like a tide reshaping the shore. News of Clara Moss's extraordinary performance had rippled through the city's social circles, carried by the chatter of guests and whispered conversations in salons and cafes. The once dismissive murmurs about a maid's misguided attempt at singing transformed into fervent discussions of the hidden star who had burst into the spotlight. Madame Langford, however, found herself at the center of an uncomfortably shifting narrative. Invitations from prominent social events she once hosted began to wane. Discreet inquiries were made by influential friends about her abrupt change of demeanor and the incident that had turned the evening upside down. Her confident front cracked under subtle social pressure. The very guests who had reveled in the spectacle now quietly condemned the harsh treatment she had inflicted on Clara. A few voices, previously silent, spoke candidly about the cruelty of shaming someone for their talents rather than nurturing it. One afternoon, as Madame Langford sat alone in her lavish drawing room, a letter arrived, formal and measured. It was from the estate's management company, gently notifying her that her contract as hostess was being reconsidered due to the negative attention her actions had attracted. Though the letter avoided explicit blame, the implication was clear: the social tide was turning, and Madame Langford's reputation was at stake. Facing the consequences of her arrogance and cruelty, she found herself forced into reflection and a rare admission of regret. Meanwhile, Clara's life began to unfold in a series of unexpected yet thrilling developments. Her meetings with Tobias Reed proved fruitful and encouraging. The seasoned producer guided her through the whirlwind of the music industry, recording sessions, vocal coaching, publicity preparation, all the intricate steps that would convert her raw talent into a polished career. Despite the demands and sudden changes, Clara remained grounded. Her humble origins and the sacrifices made before this opportunity only deepened her resolve. She often reflected on the past evening, the moment that had pivoted her life toward a future she once only dreamed of in stolen solos beside the piano. Her first single, a soulful ballad recorded with Tobias's expert production, resonated with listeners beyond expectation. Radio stations picked it up quickly, and positive reviews praised not only her voice but the authenticity that shone through each note. Clara was no longer just the maid who had timidly answered Madame Langford's haughty summons. She was an artist claiming her rightful place on the stage. In a candid interview published shortly after the single's release, Clara spoke about her journey with humility and grace. "I never imagined this path," she said softly. "But sometimes, life's detours lead us to exactly where we need to be. I'm grateful for every challenge because it built the strength I needed to stand here today." Responses to Clara's success poured in, messages of support from fans, kind words from former skeptics, and offers to collaborate with other musicians who admired her resilience. As for Madame Langford, the social retreat was a bitter pill. Privately, she wrestled with regret and the sting of lost influence. In a gesture that surprised many who knew her, she requested a private meeting with Clara, seeking not just to reconcile but to offer compensation for the public embarrassment she had caused. Clara, gracious and composed, accepted the meeting with a quiet dignity. When they met in the same stately drawing room where the earlier confrontation had taken place, the tension was palpable but softened by mutual acknowledgement of mistakes and growth. "I was wrong to treat you as I did," Madame Langford admitted, her voice uncharacteristically subdued. "You deserved respect, not ridicule." She extended a hand, not just in apology but as a symbol of restitution and a hope for a more compassionate future. Clara shook the hand firmly, replying simply, "Thank you. I hope this helps us both move forward." The resolution marked a peaceful close to the chapter where power and prejudice had overshadowed talent and humanity. On a radiant morning, Clara stood outside the recording studio, sunlight bathing her in warmth as she prepared for another day of work. She wore a simple outfit, comfortable yet confident, a reflection of the woman she had become. Around her, the city buzzed with life and opportunity. She paused for a moment, eyes bright with determination and peace, remembering the long road traveled, from the hushed corners of the estate to the gleaming stages awaiting her. In the distance, the soft strains of a piano floated faintly, a reminder of the passion that had never dimmed within her. As Clara stepped forward into the sunlight, the future stretched wide and inviting, filled with promise and sound. What would you have done if you were in Clara's place? Would you have had the courage to stand and sing despite the sting of judgment? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If Clara's story moved you, don't forget to subscribe and join us for the next inspiring tale. See you soon.